Hello and welcome to this video presentation on backwards design. I'm Jennifer Davies, a conseillère pédagogique with the Conseil scolaire Viamonde. Backwards design basically means that we know what skills and concepts we want our students to have acquired by the end of a unit. We know how we'll measure their success and what we need to do to get them there. Our time with our students is always limited, and especially for those of us who teach during prep times. We need to know the reason we're teaching the expectations, what the relevance is, what are the essentials for our English class. We need to look at the genres as a medium for teaching skills. For example, if I know that my students need to work on organizing their ideas, using compound sentences and richer language, which genre in my curriculum is going to allow my students to integrate that learning? What is the bottom line? In the example here, you can see that if I am working on a type of paragraph in grade 4 or 5, the essential learning is the structuring of a paragraph. What's important to know is that there are different intentions of paragraphs. And what's interesting to know is that some paragraphs can just be one long, complex sentence. When we plan with the end in mind, which is called planification à rebours in French, it is especially important in our English class. Large projects have to be divided into small segments that string together in a way that makes sense and adds up to a whole. When planning for our understanding, our students know what the final goal, production, or project will be. They understand how each concept they learn will help them successfully complete it. This way of planning demands more time up front, but it will definitely save you time in the long run. If we look at the example of a party, if we know exactly how we want the event to go, we can start brainstorming all of the things that we need to do. When you begin planning and you know what you want your students to be able to do, you don't need to put these lessons in any type of order. It's just all the elements that the students will need in order to be successful. Afterwards, you can start to organize the learning in a logical manner. Here are some of the questions you'll need to ask yourself when you're planning with the end in mind. What is the enduring learning I want students to take away from this? Here we're talking about what's essential. And essential learning will likely be things that students can use in other projects, in other classes, and in real life. What evidence will I gather to show the students have learned it? This will not only be evidence that you've gathered, but how can your students be proactive in documenting evidence of their own learning? Are there certain things that I need to do in a certain order? Are certain tasks dependent on others being completed? In order to engage my students, I need to try to make my task as authentic as possible. So this is an interesting diagram that takes things from what we call fake to real. So fake, for example, a test, a research report that is just going to be marked and nothing will happen with it afterwards. However, if you go all the way to the real, students will understand the value of what they're doing. Examples, your real can be no tech. Your students could be writing a play and performing a play for another class. It could be low tech. For example, I worked with a grade 6 student whose students wrote, grade 6 teacher whose students wrote persuasive letters. They chose a charity of their choice that was dear to them for a personal reason, and they tried to persuade people to give money. Afterwards, those letters were shared on the school's Facebook page in order to try to persuade parents to donate to certain charities. A real project could be high tech. For example, Skyping with another class, an author, animating a story using Scratch. If you are a little bit hesitant to integrate tech into your teaching, there's a coach in every school, an accompagnateur ou accompagnatrice, and they should be able to help you integrate technology or at least get your questions answered. In this example, we are doing the backward design of the procedural text. My hook is related to my students' real life. So I know that when my kids want to learn how to do something, they are most likely to go to YouTube, and in fact, I am more and more likely to go to YouTube myself. So what essentials is this going to teach? What else might I be able to integrate in terms of grammar, spelling, other concepts? And what might the students learn that's simply interesting? Here's my brainstorming in no particular order of what my students will need to know in order to make an effective YouTube tutorial. They'll need to know what the structure is of a procedural text and how to write an imperative sentence. They'll need to know how to break a task down into its components in a logical order, how to be concise, because when I'm looking for a YouTube tutorial, if I want to know how to put my phone on snooze from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., I am more likely to watch the tutorial that's 2 minutes long than the one that's 6 minutes long. They'll need to know how to separate a list with commas, how to use visuals to support a message, how expression and intonation can add or detract from the message, and they'll need to know the technical details of how to film a video and upload it to YouTube. When I'm planning for teaching and learning, I need to know what my priorities are. What is essential is a transferable skill that students will use in many contexts inside and outside of school. Essential skills must be mastered in order for students to have success in future grades. In this project, an example of essential learning would be how to respect chronological order, how to communicate a message clearly, and how expression and intonation can add or detract from the message. Learning that is important allows students to improve their learning and have a deeper understanding of the concepts. In this example, what might be considered important is how to structure a procedural text. A title, a list of material, numbered steps. How to write an imperative sentence might also be an example of important learning. What we might consider interesting are examples, activities, trivia, and details that students will use to master the essentials and the important concepts, but may forget after the unit of study. For example, in this situation, it would be interesting to find out how many people use the internet to find out how to do something. It might be interesting to find out how much YouTube stars make. It is interesting to find out how I use an app like Adobe Spark to make a video and how I upload it to YouTube. Okay, so this is how I've broken down what my students are going to learn and how they're going to learn it in order to be ready to write their procedural text and then to transform it into a video tutorial. We'll start with a brainstorm of when and where, in what context, my students use procedural texts. I'm going to ask them where they go to get information when they want to know how to do something. I want it to come from them that it's a YouTube tutorial that is the most pertinent for them as digital natives. We'll read examples of procedural texts, good ones, and maybe some that aren't so good. I'll ask students to find examples of procedural texts in the classroom and at home. And then we're going to study the similarities in the structure of procedural text. They should all have several things in common. In grammar, we're going to practice using commas to separate lists. I'll take a procedural text and cut it up and have students reconstruct it in a logical order. And we'll examine the structure of the imperative sentence. So my students don't necessarily need a grammar book. We can learn all of the grammar that we need, most likely from looking at these examples. We'll create success criteria for the procedural text. That's not done right away. It's done after the students have seen some examples and done some learning so that they can come up with the criteria for what makes a successful procedural text. Students will write short procedural texts and draw or find a photo of the final product. As a class, we'll read them and match them to the picture. We'll look for strengths and elements to improve in our work. We'll go on to look at examples of good and bad YouTube tutorials and determine what makes a good one and what makes a bad one. We'll add to our success criteria because we need to add the video part. My students will film the tutorials. They will give each other feedback and they will edit their tutorials, and finally we will upload them to YouTube. Because this is a project in which you do not even need to see the student's face or know their name, there's really no reason why we couldn't upload them publicly to YouTube. I have an example here of how to use the criteria for this example of the procedural text. First of all, you will ask the students what a good procedural text will look like. And on the left, you can see an example of the teacher has written down everything that the student said. So I include a clear goal, list specific materials, break down my instructions, number each step, create instructions that are accurate and detailed so that no assumptions need to be made. The reader will clearly understand how and when to complete each step. I will use transition words, use the imperative, and include adjectives and adverbs to clarify my instructions. I'll use illustrations when necessary to make sure my instructions are easy to follow. So you can see that there really is a lot of learning that goes into this. It's not simply memorizing how to write a procedural text. On the right, I've taken the success criteria and divided up the details so that I can write one clear sentence that sums up all of the details. So you can plan for understanding by using your class profile and your English or Anglais curriculum to plan a unit using the Understanding by Design template, which I think is just excellent. You can find this template in the SharePoint in Office 365. If you go to SharePoint and search for the English Teachers Network site, you will find a blank version and a version with prompts. It's available in Word, so you can download a copy to work in. The template comes from the book by Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe called Understanding by Design, which I highly recommend. If you have further questions about planning or evaluation, you can use our new service called Aide Pédagogique. You can send a Twitter message to @aidepédago. You can send an email to aidepédago@csvmont.ca. If you have questions about evaluation, about using success criteria, I would recommend listening to the first series of our podcast, Toute la classe. If you have an Apple device, you already have an app for listening to podcasts installed. It is the purple icon, and it's either called Balado or podcast, depending on the language settings on your device. If you use an Android device, you can go to the Play Store and download a free app such as Podcast Addict to subscribe to and listen to podcasts. To subscribe to our podcast, click on Search or Add, search for Toute la classe, click on the logo of our podcast, and select Subscribe. New episodes will only download while you have a Wi-Fi connection to protect your data plan. And once they are downloaded, you can listen to them anywhere. Thank you.